I'm tired of you, Mom. I'm tired of you always being here. Even Jason feels the same way. The words hit like a punch to the stomach. Stephanie stood frozen in the kitchen, the spoon in her hand trembling as her daughter, Emily, coldly told her that she wasn't welcome in the house anymore. Stephanie had poured everything she had into giving Emily a good life, this home, yet now she was being told she didn't belong. But what would you do if you were in her shoes? Would you stay and accept it, or would you stand up for yourself and reclaim your life? Welcome, my beloved subscribers. It's always such a joy to have you here, joining me for another powerful story. I appreciate each and every one of you who has taken the time to watch, like, and share. You are truly the heart of this community. Before we dive into today's story, I want to take a moment to say a quick prayer for all of you watching today. Dear God, I pray for each person watching this video right now. May you fill their hearts with peace, strength, and love. May they be blessed with good health, happiness, and the wisdom to navigate life's challenges with grace. Amen. Now, let's jump right into today's story, one that will inspire you to put yourself first and take control of your own happiness. Stephanie sat in her favorite chair by the window, gazing at the soft rain tapping against the glass. She could almost hear her husband's laughter in the silence, a memory she cherished more than anything. Richard. He had been everything to her, the love of her life. Even now, after so many years, his absence still felt like a shadow she couldn't shake. He had left her too soon, just as she was carrying their child. The suddenness of his death had left a gaping hole, one that she had spent years trying to fill, though she never quite succeeded. As a pregnant woman mourning her husband, she had to pull herself together, not just for her own sake, but for the sake of their unborn daughter, Emily. I can't do this alone, she had whispered to herself in those early days. But she did. She had to. She poured everything she had emotionally, physically, and financially into raising Emily. She did whatever it took to ensure that her daughter would never feel like she lacked anything. Every decision, every sacrifice, was made with Emily's future in mind. When Emily was little, Stephanie didn't care about the things she had to give up. Her own dreams, her own needs seemed irrelevant compared to the small, innocent face she had been tasked with nurturing. Emily was her world. There was no room for herself in it. Stephanie took on long shifts at work, missed out on social gatherings, and sacrificed her own happiness just so she could provide for Emily. She often bought clothes for Emily before herself, put her daughter's education ahead of everything. No matter how exhausted Stephanie became, she never complained. How could she? Every step, every effort, was for Emily's well-being. As the years passed, Stephanie could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. Emily was doing well in school, and as she grew older, she became more independent. Stephanie couldn't have been prouder of the woman Emily was becoming. But when Emily married Jason, things started to change. At first, Stephanie was thrilled. She loved seeing Emily so happy. But soon, the cracks began to show. Jason lost his job, and things started to feel tense at home. Stephanie noticed that Emily, no matter how much she tried to juggle work and finances, was struggling. The weight of their bills grew heavier with each passing day. Stephanie couldn't stand the thought of her daughter struggling, and without hesitation, she stepped in again. She bought them a house. A beautiful house, one that would take away their worries, give them the space to start fresh. It wasn't just a gesture of kindness, it was Stephanie's way of making sure Emily and Jason would never be homeless, never have to worry about where they would live. "I've got you, sweetheart," she had whispered to Emily, handing her the keys. "You'll always have a place here, no matter what." Stephanie sacrificed her savings, took on the extra responsibility. But she didn't mind. She did it because Emily was worth it. At the time, it seemed like the perfect solution. The house gave them stability, and it gave Stephanie peace of mind. Yet, as the years passed and Emily and Jason settled into their new home, things slowly began to change. Stephanie still tried to help as much as she could, but now her presence in the house felt different. Where she had once been welcomed with open arms, she started to sense a cold distance. Slowly, imperceptibly, Her presence began to feel more like an inconvenience than a blessing. At first, she didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't want to. But then came the night when Emily's words hit her with all the force of a wrecking ball. "I'm tired of you, Mom. I'm tired of you always being here," she had said. Stephanie felt the sharp sting of those words in the pit of her stomach. How could this be happening? She had given up everything for them, her own life, her own dreams, just to see them happy. And now, when she thought she was finally free to rest, her daughter told her she wasn't wanted anymore. I want to know, how many of you have sacrificed something precious for your loved ones? Have you ever poured your heart and soul into someone else's well-being, only to feel like your efforts went unnoticed? Let me know in the comments below. Let's talk about it, because we all deserve to be seen and appreciated for the love we give. Stephanie stood in the kitchen, stirring the soup, her mind lost in thoughts of the day ahead. The smell of garlic and onions filled the air, and the soft hum of the radio played in the background, a comforting presence in the house she had worked so hard to build for Emily and Jason. It had been a long day, but everything seemed just the way it should be, peaceful routine. But that afternoon, everything would change. The door creaked open, and Emily walked in, her face tight with something Stephanie couldn't place. Emily's gaze flickered over to her, but there was no warmth in her eyes. No greeting. Just an unsettling silence that seemed to stretch between them. Stephanie looked up from the stove, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and offered her daughter a smile. But Emily's expression remained unchanged. "Mom, we need to talk." Stephanie's heart skipped a beat. There was something in Emily's tone that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Something sharp. Something final. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Stephanie set the towel down, her hands instinctively clasping together in front of her. Her mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Emily had something on her heart, maybe she needed advice, or maybe she had just had a rough day. But when Emily spoke again, it was as if the ground beneath Stephanie's feet gave way. "I'm tired of you, Mom. I'm tired of you always being here." Emily's words sliced through the air like a jagged knife, and for a moment, Stephanie thought she might be hearing things. She stood frozen, her chest tightening, her breath caught in her throat. "What did you just say?" Stephanie whispered, the question barely leaving her lips. Emily's face remained unreadable, her eyes distant. "I said, I'm tired of you. You're always around. Even Jason feels the same way. You need to find somewhere else to live." Stephanie's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, everything in the world stopped. The kitchen felt smaller. The walls seemed to close in on her. Her daughter, her only child, was asking her to leave. To leave the house she had bought for them. The house she had sacrificed so much for. The house that had once been a symbol of her love for Emily. How could this be happening? How could Emily, after everything, say those words? The spoon Stephanie had been holding slipped from her hand and clattered against the pot with a loud bang that echoed through the silence. Her hands began to shake, the warmth in her body suddenly replaced by a coldness that spread from the tips of her fingers to the pit of her stomach. She couldn't believe it. She didn't want to believe it. "Emily." Stephanie's voice faltered. She wanted to say something, to make sense of the words her daughter had just thrown at her, but no words came. Her throat was tight, her mind racing with thoughts that couldn't connect. How had they gone from a mother and daughter who once had a deep bond to this cold, indifferent distance? "Mom," Emily said, her voice now more tired than angry. "We need space. You need to move out. We can't keep living like this." The pain of her daughter's rejection washed over Stephanie like a tidal wave, leaving her breathless and speechless. Every sacrifice, every moment she had spent making sure Emily was safe, loved, and protected, all of it seemed to be forgotten in that single, final sentence. Stephanie felt the sting of betrayal deep in her chest, a hollow ache that spread through her body like wildfire. She had given everything to make sure Emily was never without. She had sacrificed her own happiness, her own dreams, to ensure her daughter had what she needed. And now, after all those years, she was being told to leave. The words were there, just on the edge of her tongue, but she couldn't bring herself to say them. What was there left to say? Emily had made her choice, and the weight of it crushed Stephanie in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't just being asked to leave the house. She was being rejected by the very person she had spent a lifetime loving, protecting, and giving everything to. Stephanie closed her eyes, the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She felt the tears rise, but she fought them back. "I won't cry. Not now. Not in front of her." She took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of strength she had left. "Fine," she whispered, her voice trembling, but firm. "I'll leave. But I won't leave quietly." Stephanie didn't wait for Emily to respond. Without another word, she turned away and walked out of the kitchen. Her heart was breaking, but her mind was already elsewhere. She needed space. She needed time. She couldn't face Emily in that moment, not without some kind of clarity, some sense of control. Stephanie retreated to her bedroom, closing the door behind her. She slumped against the wall, her body sinking to the floor. The room felt smaller than ever before. She had spent years building a life for them, and now, in an instant, she was nothing more than an inconvenience. What would you do if you were in Stephanie's shoes? Would you stay and fight, or would you walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear how you would handle such a betrayal from someone you've loved and sacrificed so much for. The door clicked shut behind her, but Stephanie remained motionless, her back pressed against it. The words still hung in the air like a dark cloud. "I'm tired of you. I'm tired of you always being here." Every time she tried to push them out of her mind, they came rushing back, sharper, more painful. Stephanie hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected it from Emily, not after everything she had done. She had poured so much love into her daughter, so many years of sacrifice, so many moments of giving without asking anything in return. And this was how it ended? With a cold dismissal? Her heart was broken, yes, but there was something else too. Something darker that was beginning to stir inside her. Anger. Quiet, simmering anger. It wasn't the kind of rage that could erupt in a fit of shouting or tears. No, it was deeper. This was the kind of anger that grew from the soil of years of unfairness, from the realization that she had been taken for granted by the one person who should have appreciated her the most. Stephanie pressed her palms into her eyes, trying to hold back the tears, but they came anyway, warm and steady, slipping down her cheeks. How could she do this to me? The thought repeated in her mind like a broken record. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Emily wasn't a child anymore, she was an adult. She had her own life, her own responsibilities, and in her eyes, it seemed like Stephanie had outlived her usefulness. But in that quiet, painful moment, something inside Stephanie snapped. No more. She wasn't going to sit around and be the martyr anymore. She wasn't going to beg for a place in Emily's life. She deserved more. She deserved respect. She deserved peace. The silence in the room felt heavy, pressing in on her, and for the first time in years, Stephanie allowed herself to feel angry. Not just hurt or betrayed, but angry that after everything, she had been reduced to an unwelcome presence in the house she had built for them. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much. The house, the car, the groceries, the education, all of it had come from her sacrifice. Her blood, sweat, and tears. She wasn't going to walk away quietly. It was time for her to live for herself. Time for her to take back what was rightfully hers. Stephanie's heart pounded in her chest, and the anger that had been simmering for years finally rose to the surface, pushing her forward. She could feel it in her bones, the need to reclaim her life. The decision was made. She wasn't going to let Emily's rejection define her anymore. This was the beginning of her transformation. Stephanie wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and stood up straighter. She wasn't weak. She wasn't just a mother or a grandmother anymore. She was a woman with her own desires, her own needs, and for the first time in a long while, she was going to prioritize herself. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to put yourself first, even when it felt like you were letting others down? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've made decisions to protect your peace. Stephanie didn't waste any time. The next day, she picked up her phone and dialed the number of her lawyer, a trusted friend who had helped her navigate life's difficult moments. Her voice was steady, even though the storm of emotions still churned inside her. "Hello, Mrs. Davis," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I need you to help me sell the house. As soon as possible." The lawyer was surprised but didn't ask too many questions. "You want to sell it? But that's your daughter's house." "I want it sold quickly," Stephanie interrupted. "I'm ready to move on, and I'm not going to wait for them to make that decision for me." Stephanie's decision was final. She wasn't just going to leave. She was going to take back control. The house had been hers in the first place, after all. Her money, her sacrifice, her love. If Emily wanted space, she would give it to her. But not before taking what was rightfully hers. Stephanie made all the necessary arrangements with the lawyer, and within days, the house was listed for sale. She couldn't believe how quickly it was happening. It was happening faster than she had expected, but the urgency of it felt right. The faster it sold, the faster she could start over. Packing was the next task, and Stephanie approached it methodically. She sorted through everything with care, taking only the things that mattered most, things she had bought with her own money, things that were symbols of her hard work. The photo album of her husband, the few precious keepsakes from her childhood, and some of her favorite books. She took the kitchen utensils that had seen so many meals prepared with love. Each item was a symbol of her past, but they weren't her future. As she packed, Stephanie allowed herself to reflect on the years she had spent making sure Emily and Jason had everything they needed. Everything. She had given up so much, but now it was time to stop giving without receiving anything in return. It was time to take a step back and start thinking about her own happiness. She sealed the boxes with finality. This is it, she thought, as she glanced around the house one last time. It had been a home, but it no longer felt like one to her. It was time to move forward, time for her to take back her life. Do you think Stephanie was justified in selling the house without telling Emily? Or do you think she should have stayed and tried to fix things with her daughter? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know where you stand. The first night in her new apartment was unlike anything Stephanie had ever experienced. The quiet was overwhelming at first, the silence unfamiliar after years of constant noise in the house she had given everything to. But as she sat in her new living room, surrounded by only the things she had chosen for herself, a deep sense of peace washed over her. For the first time in a long time, Stephanie felt free. The weight of Emily's rejection, the guilt of her sacrifices, the exhaustion of always being the one who gave, all of it melted away. She didn't have to worry about anyone else's needs or expectations. This was her space, her sanctuary. The apartment was small, but it was hers. The walls were bare, but they felt like a blank canvas, a place where Stephanie could finally create the life she wanted, without anyone else's interference. She placed a small vase of fresh flowers on the table, something simple but beautiful. It felt like a small victory. She spent the night in solitude, savoring the quiet and reflecting on everything that had led her to this moment. In the past, her life had always been about giving. But now it was about living. For the first time in years, she had space to breathe, to rediscover who she was outside of her role as a mother and grandmother. Stephanie smiled as she looked out the window, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. She was going to be okay. She was going to rebuild, and this time, she was doing it for herself. How do you reclaim your peace and independence when life feels like it's slipping through your fingers? I'd love to hear how you've taken control of your own happiness in the comments below. Let's talk about how we all can find our peace. It had been weeks since Stephanie had left the house. Weeks since Emily's words had cut through her heart like a knife. But in the quiet of her new apartment, Stephanie had found peace, something she hadn't felt in years. There were still moments of uncertainty, still flashes of pain, but they didn't last as long as they used to. The weight of Emily's rejection no longer pressed down on her shoulders, and Stephanie was beginning to feel more like herself again, more like the woman she had forgotten in the years of self-sacrifice. But then, one rainy afternoon, the doorbell rang. Stephanie didn't expect to answer it. She had been so used to the silence of her new life, the solitude that had started to feel like freedom. But something about the sound of the bell made her pause. Her heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, she stood and walked to the door. She opened it slowly, and there she was, Emily. Her daughter's face was red from crying, her eyes swollen and tired. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, as though she wasn't sure if she even had the right to knock on the door. It was an awkward moment, the kind of silence that only comes when words have already been spoken, and nothing can undo them. "Mom," Emily finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I never meant to hurt you." Stephanie could see the regret in her daughter's eyes, the guilt that was beginning to suffocate her. She had heard this tone before. Emily had said things like this in the past, whenever she had made a mistake or misunderstood the gravity of her actions. But now, after everything that had happened, Stephanie wasn't sure how she felt about these apologies. "I didn't know it would hurt this much," Emily continued, her voice breaking as she stepped into the apartment. I didn't know what I was saying. I wanted space, but I didn't want to push you away forever. I'm sorry, Mom." "I'm so sorry." Stephanie stood there for a moment, her heart conflicted. She wanted to reach out, wanted to comfort Emily the way she always had. But as she looked at her daughter, something inside her told her it wasn't the same anymore. The dynamic had shifted, and the distance between them felt palpable, like a wall that had been built from years of neglecting herself. Stephanie took a deep breath and let the silence hang in the air for a moment before she finally spoke. "Emily," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I've spent my whole life putting everyone else first, you first. I've sacrificed my time, my dreams, my happiness, just to make sure you were okay. And I did it willingly. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself in the process. I allowed myself to be treated like I didn't matter, like I was just here to serve you." Emily's tears were now streaming down her face. She reached out, but Stephanie gently stepped back, holding up her hand as a signal to stay where she was. "No, Emily," Stephanie said softly. "You can't just come here and expect everything to be okay because you're sorry. You told me I wasn't welcome in my own home. And I left, but not because I wanted to, because I had no choice. You rejected me. And now, you want me to forget all of that and come back." Stephanie's voice cracked slightly, but she didn't let herself falter. She had to be strong. She couldn't go back to the way things were. "I've done everything for you," she continued, her words steady, but laced with years of pain. "And now, for the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. I'm not going to let you make me feel small, make me feel like I'm nothing but an inconvenience. I have spent too many years sacrificing my happiness for everyone else. That ends now." Emily's sobs grew louder, but Stephanie's heart didn't soften the way it used to. She knew this moment, this apology, wasn't enough to undo everything that had happened. It wasn't enough to erase the years of feeling invisible, of being taken for granted. Stephanie walked over to the small table in the corner of the room and poured herself a glass of water, taking a slow sip before returning her gaze to Emily. "You're not a child anymore, Emily," she said gently, but with finality. "I can't be the person I was. I can't just give and expect nothing in return. I have to choose myself. And I won't let anyone make me feel like I'm less than that." Emily stood in the doorway, her body trembling with emotion, but Stephanie remained firm. There was no turning back now. Stephanie knew this wasn't easy for Emily. But this was the reality of their new relationship. She had to let go of the past and move forward, even if it meant walking away from the person she had once been. Do you believe in second chances? Or do you think sometimes the only way to move forward is to walk away from toxic relationships? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you believe it's possible to rebuild trust after betrayal? Stephanie sat alone in her apartment, the soft hum of the city outside her window providing a gentle backdrop to the stillness inside. The past few days had been a whirlwind, a blur of emotions she hadn't been prepared for. Emily's visit had thrown her back into the past, into the old patterns she thought she had left behind. But now, as the dust settled and the weight of the conversation lifted, Stephanie had time to reflect on what had happened and, more importantly, what needed to happen next. She couldn't go back. That simple thought was the bedrock of her resolve. Everything about her life had led her to this moment, Everything she had done for Emily, for Jason, for everyone else. But for once, she was the one who had to come first. Stephanie's mind wandered back to the early years. She remembered being pregnant with Emily, the excitement, the joy, and the uncertainty of raising a child alone after Richard passed. She had poured everything into her daughter, giving up her own life to make sure Emily had the best start. She had worked tirelessly to provide for them, sacrificed pieces of herself she'd never get back. And then, when Emily had grown older and Stephanie thought she could finally rest, she'd been asked to leave, just like that. Her chest tightened as she thought of that moment. But this time, there was no anger left. There was only an undeniable truth that she could no longer ignore. I have given too much, and I am still giving without ever asking for anything in return. Stephanie felt a quiet sadness settle over her, but there was a deeper feeling that made her sit up straighter, more resolute than ever. This ends now. Her decision to leave the house had been hard, but it was the right one. Every time she thought about it, she felt a sense of liberation, a lightness she hadn't known in years. Emily might have rejected her, but that didn't mean Stephanie had to stay in the background, always giving, always sacrificing. Self-love. She had heard the phrase so many times, but it had never truly meant anything to her until now. Self-respect. These weren't just words to her anymore. They were a lifeline. The realization washed over her with the force of a wave. She had given and given, but she had never asked for anything in return, no time for herself, no space, no appreciation. But now, she could hear a voice deep within, louder than the guilt or the sadness, reminding her of something vital. She was worth more than this. She could love Emily, she could be there for her, but not at the expense of her own well-being. There was no reason to sacrifice herself to the point of invisibility, to lose herself in the process. Stephanie looked at the small vase of flowers on her table, the only decoration in her new, modest apartment. For a moment, she thought about the house, the one she had given up to help Emily and Jason. It had been filled with memories, moments of joy, but also of exhaustion. In the back of her mind, the question echoed, was it worth it? The answer, though painful, was clear. No, it had never been worth losing herself. Now, Stephanie was beginning to see the importance of boundaries, not just in relationships with others, but with herself. She had spent so much of her life being everything to everyone else, and now she needed to be everything to herself. That didn't mean abandoning Emily. It meant that from this point forward, she was going to protect her own space, her own heart. As she looked out the window at the city below, Stephanie couldn't help but smile to herself. There was something powerful in the solitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt like her own person, not just a mother, a grandmother, or a caregiver. She had the freedom to be. And that's the beauty of it. She could love her family, but she couldn't allow herself to be a martyr for them anymore. It's okay to choose yourself, she thought. It's okay to set boundaries, to say no when you need to. It's okay to protect your peace. For too long, she had allowed guilt to cloud her judgment. She had thought that love meant giving up everything. But now she knew better. Love didn't have to come with such a heavy price tag. Stephanie smiled softly to herself. She was still the same woman who had loved her family with everything she had. But she had finally learned to love herself in the process. It had taken years, but she had found the strength to stop putting everyone else's needs above her own. She wasn't just reclaiming her life, she was rebuilding it. One small step at a time. What do you think the lesson of this story is? Do you believe that setting boundaries is important, even when it means making difficult decisions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what this story means to you and how you balance love and self-respect in your own life. Stephanie moved across the room, her hands brushing the surface of the small wooden table she had placed by the window. The sunlight outside had begun to fade, casting a soft glow that danced across the walls. She had always loved the quiet hum of the city at dusk, the world outside continuing its rhythm while she sat in her own stillness. This was the peace she had longed for. The feeling of freedom, of being untethered from years of obligation, was intoxicating. She moved to the small kitchenette, running her fingers along the countertop as she made herself a cup of tea. Her movements were slow, almost deliberate, as if savoring the act of just living. It had been so long since she had allowed herself this time. For years, her life had been filled with the demands of others, and now, here she was, standing in a space entirely hers, no one to answer to, no one to take care of. Stephanie set the kettle down and watched the steam rise in delicate tendrils, lost in thought. She was no longer just a mother, a voice inside her whispered. She was a woman again. For so long, she had identified herself solely by the roles she played, a mother, a grandmother, a caregiver. But today, she realized those roles didn't define her. She defined herself. The weight of it all, the sacrifice, the years of giving without asking for anything in return, had been crushing at times, but she had reached the tipping point. She was reclaiming her life. It wasn't about revenge, it was about regaining control over the one thing she had neglected, herself. Stephanie poured the tea into her favorite mug, the one with the small floral pattern she had found at a thrift shop years ago. It was the only thing she had kept for herself, even during the hardest years when every penny went into her family's needs. As she sipped the warm tea, she allowed herself a small smile. She was at peace. She could hear the city outside her window, a far cry from the noise of family, of demands. It was a different kind of silence, one that felt like an invitation. She set the mug down, and for the first time in a long while, Stephanie began to stretch. She reached for the small yoga mat she had bought impulsively weeks ago, not knowing why, but knowing she needed something that wasn't about anyone else. Maybe she had been too focused on other people's needs for too long, she thought, as she knelt down to the mat. The stretching felt good, a reminder that her body still belonged to her, that she had every right to care for herself, just as she had done for others. She had to start living for herself now fully. The transition from caretaker to self-care hadn't been easy, but as Stephanie moved through the gentle stretches, she felt the tension in her muscles begin to loosen. She wasn't bound to anyone's expectations anymore. Her life was her own, and with each stretch, she could feel herself expanding, not just physically, but emotionally. She was reclaiming her space in this world. She wasn't just waiting for approval, she was giving herself permission to thrive. After a few more stretches, Stephanie stood up, her legs a little unsteady, but strong beneath her. She walked back to the window, her reflection staring back at her, and for a moment, she allowed herself to truly see the woman she had become. She wasn't broken. She wasn't weak. She was a woman who had weathered storms, and who had finally decided to stand tall, on her own 2 feet. It was in that moment that she knew her journey wasn't over. It had just begun. If you found this story empowering, please like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. And leave a comment below. How do you prioritize yourself in your relationships? How do you reclaim your peace when life gets overwhelming? I'd love to hear how you take charge of your happiness. The weeks had passed in a quiet blur of small, deliberate moments. Each day felt like a fresh start, a blank canvas on which Stephanie was painting a life entirely her own. No longer did she find herself trapped in the roles that had defined her for so long: mother, grandmother, the selfless provider who gave everything for others. She had shed those layers of expectation, of obligation, and was now free to explore a version of herself she had neglected for decades. Stephanie's transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. Every day brought something new, something small but meaningful, a quiet victory, a discovery about who she was when she wasn't defined by anyone else's needs. The weight of years of sacrifice was slowly lifting, and she was beginning to see the world through new eyes. It was almost as if she were seeing it for the first time. One morning, as the sun filtered through her curtains, casting a golden light on her small apartment, Stephanie decided to take a walk. It was something simple. She hadn't walked for enjoyment in years. Her life had been filled with errands, running after responsibilities, and making sure others were cared for. Now, she was walking simply to breathe, simply to be. She pulled on her sneakers, a pair she had bought on impulse weeks ago, not because she needed them, but because she wanted something new for herself. She slipped out the door, letting the fresh air greet her, and walked down the quiet street. The sounds of the city felt like music, like a rhythm she could finally keep pace with. She wasn't in a hurry. There was no one else to rush home to. There was no expectation hanging over her. As she walked, she found herself smiling at the simple things. A small cafe on the corner where she could sit and have a coffee without the rush. The flowers blooming along the sidewalk, so vibrant in their colors. The children playing in the park, their laughter a reminder of the innocence that still existed in the world. In that moment, Stephanie realized something important. She had stopped seeing these little things because she had been too busy living for everyone else. She had been too consumed by making sure the people she loved were okay. But now, in this space, she could see it all, and it was beautiful. Later that week, Stephanie signed up for a pottery class. It was something she had always wanted to try, but had never made the time for. Now, with her mornings free, she could indulge in this new hobby. She found a local studio, small and cozy, tucked away in a quiet part of town. The first class was awkward. Her hands too stiff, the clay a little too foreign. But as the weeks went on, she began to find her rhythm. The act of molding the clay was therapeutic, almost meditative. There was something incredibly satisfying about creating something from nothing, shaping the rough, unyielding material into something beautiful. Each pottery piece she created was a symbol of her journey, rough at first, but slowly becoming something more polished, more meaningful. The more she shaped the clay, the more Stephanie felt her own life being shaped too. She was in control now. The small victories became more frequent. One morning, Stephanie woke up early, the sun just beginning to peek through the window. Instead of rushing to do something for someone else, she decided to treat herself to breakfast at a cafe she had noticed during her walks. She ordered a simple meal, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee, but it felt like an act of defiance. It was her choice and no one else's. As she sat in the cafe, savoring each bite, she realized how much she had missed enjoying the little things. How much she had given up to make sure everyone else had what they needed. For the first time in a long time, she was doing something for herself, and it was enough. Stephanie started to fill her days with more of these small acts of kindness to herself. She spent hours reading, catching up on books she had always wanted to dive into but never had the time. She'd take leisurely walks in the park, watching the sunset, and enjoying the simple joy of being. She learned how to cook new recipes, just for herself, no more rushed meals or cooking for others. She did it slowly, savoring the process of cooking with care. One day, as she sat on her balcony, sipping a glass of wine and watching the world go by, Stephanie thought about all the years she had spent putting herself last. How, in all those years, she had never once asked herself what she wanted. It was as though she had forgotten that her own dreams, her own needs mattered too. But now she was finally allowing herself to dream again. She had so much more left to give, not just to others, but to herself. Her transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual, too. There was a peace inside her that had been absent for so long. It was as if the years of sacrifice had finally led her to this place of clarity, where she could see herself clearly for the first time in years. If you had the chance to take control of your life and live for yourself, how would you redefine it? What small changes would you make to prioritize your own happiness? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. How do you take care of yourself in a world that often demands so much from you? Stephanie stood at the window of her apartment, gazing out at the city below. It was a quiet evening, and the soft glow of the streetlights seemed to echo her own sense of calm. She had come so far since she made the decision to leave her old life behind. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. The life she had once known, one where she gave everything to others, where her happiness was secondary, was no longer hers. And that was okay. In fact, it was more than okay. It was empowering. She had reclaimed her life, piece by piece, and each new day felt like a fresh opportunity to live on her own terms. In the beginning, Stephanie had been afraid. Afraid of what her family would think, afraid of letting go, afraid that choosing herself meant she was a failure as a mother or a grandmother. But now, with every step she took forward, the fear had lessened. She had learned a critical lesson that so many struggle to accept: self-respect isn't selfish. It had taken time for her to truly understand this. For years, she had allowed her love for her family to override her own well-being. She thought that giving everything to them was the only way to show love. But that belief had nearly cost her everything, the peace she so desperately needed, the sense of self she had sacrificed, and the life she could have lived if she had just known her worth. Setting boundaries was the turning point for her. It wasn't just about saying no to others, it was about saying yes to herself. Choosing herself meant she wasn't available for others' demands at the expense of her own peace. It meant being clear about what she was willing to accept and what she wasn't. It was about recognizing that love, even familial love, shouldn't come at the cost of her mental and emotional health. Stephanie had loved Emily deeply, with every ounce of her being, and the pain of being rejected by her daughter had cut to the core. But as much as she loved Emily, she could no longer stay in a relationship where she was constantly giving and never receiving. She had to let go, even if it meant temporarily stepping away from the person she thought she couldn't live without. Her decision was painful, but in the long run, it was the most loving thing she could do, for both herself and for Emily. Sometimes, stepping away from a toxic relationship, even one with a loved one, is the best way to protect your own well-being and foster healthier dynamics in the future. Looking back now, Stephanie could see that her peace and happiness were worth far more than the years she spent sacrificing herself. And as time passed, she began to understand something she hadn't truly grasped before. Self-love is not about indulgence, it's about respect. It's about standing firm in your worth and not allowing anyone, even those closest to you, to diminish it. She had learned that family love is invaluable, but it shouldn't come at the expense of your own peace. True love, whether from family, friends, or yourself, requires respect, honesty, and healthy boundaries. Without those, love can become suffocating, draining, and ultimately destructive. Now, Stephanie was living in a way that allowed her to respect and love herself. She didn't have to be everything for everyone. She was enough, just as she was. And it was never too late to start reclaiming the parts of herself she had lost in the process of caring for others. It's never too late to start choosing yourself. As she thought about everything she had learned, Stephanie felt proud. Proud of how far she had come, proud of the strength she had discovered in herself, and proud of the woman she had become. She was no longer bound by guilt or by the expectation that her love for her family meant she had to lose herself in the process. She was standing tall on her own, with her heart full of love for herself first. What lessons have you learned from Stephanie's journey? How do you apply those lessons in your own life? Have you ever had to set boundaries with loved ones to protect your peace? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about how we all can reclaim our lives and prioritize our happiness. Stephanie picked up her paintbrush and dipped it into the vibrant blue paint. The blank canvas before her was a symbol of her new beginning, one that was entirely hers to create. The once heavy and overwhelming weight of the past now seemed distant, like a memory that could no longer dictate the direction of her life. As she applied broad strokes to the canvas, Stephanie marveled at the freedom she now had. For years, she had felt as though she was living on someone else's terms, giving and giving until there was nothing left. She had been so consumed by the roles she had played, mother, grandmother, caregiver, that she lost sight of the woman underneath. But now, with each stroke, she reclaimed a part of herself. This wasn't just about painting a picture, it was about painting her life. Her future, like the canvas, was open and full of possibility. She could now choose the colors, the shapes, the direction. The world she had once felt trapped in was now one she could shape as she saw fit. Stephanie had learned a powerful truth over the past months: self-love is not selfish. Choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and taking control of your happiness is not only necessary, but transformative. She had found the courage to step away from toxic dynamics, and in doing so, she found the woman she had forgotten. She was no longer a passive participant in her life, she was actively designing it. As the final strokes came together, a beautiful image began to emerge, one of freedom, strength, and peace. This was her masterpiece, and she was proud of the woman who had created it. Stephanie set the brush down, took a step back, and admired her work. It was a reflection of her growth, of the woman she had become, someone who knew her worth and was no longer willing to compromise her peace for anyone else's comfort. The future ahead of her was bright, full of possibilities, and she was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. If Stephanie's journey resonated with you, I encourage you to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Follow the channel for more stories of strength, empowerment, and self-discovery. And remember, you have the power to create your own masterpiece. How do you prioritize your happiness and set boundaries in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's inspire each other to live fully and authentically.